What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Tech Cubed, and today we're going to be taking a look at this laptop right here. This is the M2 13-inch MacBook Pro, and we're also going to be comparing it to this right here, my 2017 MacBook Air. So without further ado, let's get started. So to provide some background, I used a 2017 MacBook Air for about 5 years or so. And I'm going to be providing, first off, my experiences with that computer, and then we'll kind of get into my new computer and how that's working out, and then we'll kind of get into like the new MacBook Air situation and who is this really for. So let's get started with this one. So first off, let's talk about the fact that my old MacBook Air used an Intel Core i5 processor, clocked at 1.8 gigahertz. Now, it was never particularly fast, like at all. This computer was never particularly like I would never use it and think, oh, this is a really fast machine. However, it did get the job done for basic word processing and all that. Another thing, keep in mind, it was never built to be a super fast computer either. And so another thing to take a look at as well is how it aged. Now, it did not age particularly well because it got slower over the years. And by that, I mean the more updates that it got, the slower it would get. You would think that makes sense, right? But ever since High Sierra came out, which was the first operating system it shipped with, it kept getting worse and worse and worse at a rate that I honestly think it shouldn't have. Now, so that was one of the reasons that led to me upgrading to something new. Now, this is not like necessarily a daily driver machine. This is more like a portable computer on the go type of machine. So just keep that in mind. So my perspective is not going to be mainly from using this at home all the time, but instead taking this with me when I go to places and using it as like a computer there. So another thing to take a look at as well, my new MacBook Pro is a little bit smaller than my old MacBook Air. So it's not a big difference, but it's something to keep in mind because if you like open up the lid and all that, you'll see it's a little more compressed, if that makes sense. Like it's a little more compact as well. Now the screen as well on the new MacBook Pro is infinitely way better. It's not even close comparing the old screen to the new screen. So that's something to keep in mind as well. The MacBook Air is a little heavier than the MacBook Pro. So it's not a big difference at all. It's just a slight bit heavier. Like you would have to really hold them both to really notice which is heavier because they're pretty close. And as well on my old MacBook Air, I had 128 gigs of storage. Now that was all right for about the first year, but once you really start to load on files and programs and all that, it really starts to not become a whole lot anymore. So that's why on my new one, I upgraded to the 512 gig of storage because over the years, I think I'm going to need way more than even the stock 256 that comes with the new 13-inch MacBook Pro. So I think 512 is a good sweet spot there. So I definitely recommend upgrade the storage, even if you don't think you're going to need it. It's going to be way more worth it now if you just do it now than in the long run when you are out of storage and you have to get like external drives or something else like that to handle all your files that you wouldn't need to if you just got the upgraded storage anyway. And now it is a little more expensive, and honestly that's just the Apple tax. However, it may be more worth it in the long run. So another thing, this is a small thing I noticed between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro. The MacBook Pro has a much better trackpad. It's bigger, it's much nicer. Now, it's interesting because the MacBook Air's trackpad isn't bad either. In fact, Apple has always made a lot of really nice trackpads. But coming from the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro is just such a nice trackpad. It's one of those haptic trackpads, so it doesn't actually click. It has like a little vibration, so that's interesting as well. Also, the MacBook Air had this little wedge shape that I wasn't really a big fan of, honestly, so there's that as well. I like the more squared off shape now because the wedge shape, it gets bigger and then it gets smaller towards when it gets to the edge. I never really liked that design. However, that's something to keep in mind as well, I guess, at the end of the day. So now let's get into my new one. First off, we're going to be talking about the M2 processor, which I guess is the main thing about this. Now, I have seen a lot of people say the design is really old and doesn't look that good, but I like the design, personally. I think it looks pretty nice. And the M2 processor is a great processor. It gets such great performance out of it. It's really insane because you don't expect to get that much performance out of it. As someone who came from using a lot of Intel and AMD machines, you don't expect the amount of performance you're actually going to get with something like the M1, the M2, or even one of the M1 Pros or Maxes. So you get a lot of performance there. In fact, the single core performance is truly incredible. Like I don't think I have a single other computer that has that same level of single core performance that M2 MacBook Pro gets. And that's saying a lot because I have like overclockable like Core i9 processors in my possession. So, there's that level of performance as well to keep in mind if you are going to get something like that. Um, Now, how I feel about the touch bar, now that's interesting. So this is one of the touch bar ones. I have used it for a little while, and I just want to say it's not a bad piece of technology at all. The thing about touch bar though is I wish that how they did the touch bar was a little differently. I wish I still had my function keys, but also like the touch bar like in front of it. I wish they had that instead of just a touch bar to get the function keys. Touch bar is not bad. I just wish they implemented it a little bit differently. So Touch ID as well. First MacBook that has Touch ID for me. It works pretty good. There's not a whole lot to say about it. I mean, it's really fast, so that's pretty nice. Battery life. That's another thing about this computer. Incredible battery life. Like if you use this like occasionally throughout your day, you could probably use it for a whole week without charging it. It has such great battery life. In fact, I think it's the best battery life computer that Apple sells right now. They advertise, I think it's up to like 20 something hours battery life, but honestly, if you're not using it a whole lot, like just using it occasionally throughout your day, you could easily get through a whole week without charging it. Has great battery life, so that's something as well. Now for the portability, it is great portability. Like I said, it's more compact than my MacBook Air, so it's a little smaller, but it's still a very portable machine. Like you can just put it in like a bag or a case or something and take it with you wherever you go. It's very portable, not super heavy, and it's great. I may recommend that if you are going to be taking this with you all the time and you're going somewhere, maybe get a case, not because you're gonna drop it, dent or whatever, but just because it's made from aluminium and you may get scratches on it. So I recommend maybe getting a case if you're gonna take it with you a lot to protect against those scratches. Again, it's better to prevent it now than to worry about it later, in my opinion. So now this is a small thing that I've noticed as well, that the screen is very prone to fingerprints. Now, I'm not talking about like the screen, like the display itself, but like in the little bezel, like where you open the computer, there are fingerprints there. So they build up over time. So I recommend cleaning that from time to time. It's a very small thing. However, I just noticed that whenever you open the computer, you're going to end up touching the bezel a little bit. That just happens with all of them. But since there's like that black bezel there, it does get pretty prone to fingerprints. Not a big deal. Just take like a wipe and clean it, or a microfiber cloth, something like that. Again, not a big deal. Now, interestingly enough, the Intel app support, so that was something that happened when Apple switched from PowerPC to Intel. They had to have, it was Rosetta to make it to where you could run your PowerPC apps on your Intel-based Mac. They got support for that back in, I think it was Snow Leopard, so it was a while ago. But now we're on the next version of Rosetta, which is for Intel on an Apple Silicon Mac. Now, I just want to say that works okay. It works really well for some programs, and then okay for others. Like the most common problem I have is with resolution. Like I'll say, I have a certain resolution I want the program to run in, but it'll run something smaller or it's distorted. Not a big deal at all, but it's just something to keep in mind. It's not perfect yet. I'm sure it'll get better as they implement more versions of it. Interestingly enough as well, this is something I've been seeing a lot, like that the box this computer comes in has been the one that Apple's used for a while. Again, this is just an off-topical small thing, but it's just something to keep in mind as well, that I guess the Apple has been using the other boxes that the previous version of the MacBook Pro came in. It's not a big deal, it's just something I wanted to address really quick, that I guess they have been using the previous boxes for that. Now, let's get to how does it compare to the M2 MacBook Air, which is $800 less than what the M2 MacBook Pro starts at. The M2 MacBook Air starts at $1,200, the M2 MacBook Pro starts at $1,300. And I've been seeing a lot of people say that the M2 MacBook Air is such a better deal and an overall better machine. So let's look at that for a minute. Now let's get to, so first off, the price, of course, is a little cheaper, and then it has a redesign. So it is slightly different than the previous generation of MacBook Airs. They have like the midnight colors and all that, and then they went back to MagSafe as well. And then they have, I think it was the Liquid Retina display. However, when we really get down to it, I think the main thing that really separates the two is the battery life. You get so much better battery life on the MacBook Pro. Now, the redesign, honestly, it's not that big of a deal to me. I doubt it's big of a deal to most people. It's not incredibly different than how it was previously. I mean, it's different, sure, but it's not like revolutionary. Like completely, you don't get super much better performance than obviously the M1 version, because I mean that had the previous design. And the M2 is obviously better than the M1. Apple showcased that in the benchmarks, and it has proven to be much faster. However, the redesign isn't going to give you better performance. So it's really just aesthetic, and I don't think the M2 MacBook Pro looks bad either. In fact, I think it looks really nice. And then, of course, you get things like the Touch Bar and all that. So honestly, so I will put up the specs. So if you want to compare the two, you can do that, or you go to Apple's website and compare them there, because they are different, and there's a bunch of little differences here and there. Like, for example, with the MacBook Pro, you get the fast charger. With the MacBook Air, you don't. And then, of course, on the MacBook Air, the starting one at 1200, you get an 8-core GPU versus the MacBook Pro, you get a 10-core GPU. So you are going to get better performance if you spend the extra $100 and upgrade that. Now, you can upgrade the Air to a 10-core GPU, but honestly, that's like personal preference, and if you want to do that there. But if you're spending the extra $100, you can still get those 10 GPU cores, you get the fast charger, better battery life, all that. Now, of course, still get things with the MacBook Air, but honestly, you can go compare that yourself on Apple's website. I'll link the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro in the description below if you want to go check those out. But I think another question is, who is this for? Now, I think that the MacBook Air is more for, because another thing as well to keep in mind, the MacBook Air doesn't have a fan, whereas the MacBook Pro does. So the processor may throttle. Now, that's important to keep in mind if you are going to be using this computer for any sort of like video editing or any of that. So I think if you're using this for more video editing or more intensive tasks, the MacBook Pro is the way to go. But if you're more using it for like daily like typing documents and things like that, the MacBook Air may be better. Honestly, again, it's all up to personal preference, and I'm not here to tell you what to buy. But I think that's kind of where Apple is going with this. The MacBook Air is for like the more like typing up documents and doing all that, and then the occasional video or photo editing. But the MacBook Pro, because it has the fan and the extra GPU cores, it is more for your video editing, maybe photo editing, things like that. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. This has just been a quick little look / review after 2 months of me using the M2 MacBook Pro. I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any suggestions or comments, please leave them in the description below. I love reading your guys' comments. But I think that will do it all for me today. Tech Cubed over and out.